Today, we're covering the emotional drivers behind hair loss. Now, hair loss is often a deeply painful experience. Though some may see it as simply a problem with vanity, it usually goes much deeper. Welcome back to the Mind Change Podcast. I'm your host, Heather McKean. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and download. It really helps us to continue to create all this great content. I just want to thank many listeners who requested this condition. Now, metaphorically and metaphysically, hair is a very important feature for humans. For centuries, people have believed that hair symbolizes strength, vitality, freedom, beauty, and power. Some think that for women, hair signifies their allure and seductive power, as well as their strength, creativity, and intuition. For men, some think that hair represents virility. It can also reflect their artistic nature or their rebellion against societal authority, allowing them to reclaim personal strength and vitality. We also see sometimes in men this balded but bearded appearance. So bald on top but bearded or heavy facial hair. Some say that that's linked to people who rely more on intellectual abilities and might struggle a little bit more with emotional ones. So we know that hair is closely tied to personal dignity, and for some it's the essence of power, and it influences our self-image. Some people believe that it connects individuals to spiritual, cosmic, or higher energies. And others think that it reflects the relationship with one's father or a father figure in life. Now, hair grows near the seventh chakra or the crown chakra, and that's considered an antenna that bridges the physical and spiritual realms. So a lot of things around the significance of hair. Now, the roots of hair can often symbolize our connection and rootedness to something beyond ourselves, or more of the spiritual or ethereal worlds. The condition of one's hair sometimes is said to reflect the relationship between their spiritual self and their rational and physical self. Others believe that hair represents the ability to transform outdated beliefs and notions that hinder personal growth. Also, the state of one's hair can indicate sexual, genital, or reproductive vitality. Now, a very broad overview of hair loss could indicate that someone has moved away from the internal divine or the spiritual and is tending to orient more toward rational or material side of humanity. They likely have a good deal of intuition that's being rejected in favor of actions or reactions to their environment. Another overall driver for hair loss is chronic self-condemnation. So these are people that possibly beat themselves up for every mistake that's ever been made. It can also be frustration with imperfection and a great deal of worry. Now, as we discuss hair loss in general, I want to point out that this information covers a myriad of different hair loss conditions. And while each may have nuanced drivers, the overall drivers will apply to multiple conditions. So some of these conditions are androgenetic alopecia. So androgenetic alopecia is the most common type of hair loss. It affects more than 50 million men and 30 million women in the United States alone. Commonly known as male pattern hair loss or female pattern hair loss, androgenetic alopecia is thought to be hereditary. Another word for that, again, is male pattern hair loss. And in men, hair loss can begin anytime after puberty, and then it progresses over the course of years or even decades. And usually in this type of hair loss, it starts above the temples and then continues around the perimeter and the top of the head, often leaving a ring of hair around the bottom of the scalp. And many men with this male pattern hair loss eventually will become bald. Now, with female pattern hair loss, The hair slowly thins all over the scalp, but the hairline usually doesn't recede. Many women experience this type of hair loss as a natural part of aging, people say. And although hair loss may begin anytime after puberty, female pattern hair loss can continue to cause hair to thin dramatically over their entire life, but rarely does it lead to baldness. Now, another condition is telogen efflorivum. And that is a type of hair loss that occurs when large numbers of follicles on the scalp enter the resting stage of the hair growth called telogen. But then the next phase of growth in the hair never begins again. And that causes hair to fall out all over the scalp without new growth. Another condition is alopecia areata, which is an autoimmune condition. And that means that the body's immune system attacks healthy tissues, including the hair follicles. This causes hair to fall out and prevents new hair from growing. This condition can affect adults and children, and hair loss can begin suddenly and without warning. Hair from the scalp typically falls out in small patches, but is not painful. Hair in other parts of the body, including eyebrows and eyelashes, may also fall out. Over time, this disease may lead to alopecia totalis, or complete hair loss. So another condition that we're sort of wrapping up in the overview of hair loss today is cicatricial alopecia. And that's also known as scarring alopecia. And it's a rare type of hair loss in which inflammation destroys hair follicles and can cause scar tissue to form in their place. After the scar tissue forms, hair will not regrow. And the hair loss in this condition may begin so slowly that the symptoms aren't noticeable, or that hair might start to fall out all at once. Other symptoms with this condition include itching, swelling, red or white lesions on the scalp that might resemble a rash. And this type of hair loss can occur at any age and can affect men and women. All right, another condition is lichen planopilaris. And that's a type of alopecia that occurs when a common skin condition called lichen planus affects the scalp. Now, lichen planopilaris may cause a dry, flaky rash to appear on the skin that causes hair on the scalp to fall out in clumps. And the scalp may also become red, irritated, and covered in small, white, itchy, painful bumps. And that condition is one that affects more women than men, but in rare cases can affect men as well. So I know there's many other hair loss conditions, and likely the drivers that we cover today will cover those particular conditions. But again, like I said, there's sometimes nuance. They're small, but there's slight nuance to the individual conditions. Let's start with some of the childhood experiences that may be contributing to these conditions. So you may have grown up in an environment where you were trained to experience yourself as bad, wrong, or even evil. Parents or close family members may have had a fearful or judgmental reaction to children having agency or personal power or potency. Another possible driver would involve being heavily programmed not to be too threatening or self-developing. So any show of dissension toward family values or beliefs may have been met with severe consequences like abandonment or rejection. Another driver could be that the family of origin may have been strongly attached to a belief around non-deservingness or lack, or of the fear of becoming too noticeable in an environment. Like it's not good to have too much or to be too comfortable because you may draw negative attention to yourself or to the family. That can sometimes be in strongly religious backgrounds where a belief of suffering or of humble living is one of virtue and value. And for children, that can sometimes translate into something very different, more about their personal worth and value rather than just material. Another driver could be that love and acceptance were highly conditional, meaning you only belong or deserve love if you think like we think or act like we act or do what you're told. Another driver is there could have been a lack of emotional freedom during your childhood to make your own decisions. Instead, you had to adhere to the choices made by caregivers or adults who often seemed unhappy, anxious, or stressed out. Another driver is the intense amount of control or scrutiny in a family maybe made it feel like you couldn't make any mistakes or stand up for yourself. Or that programming would have trained you to believe that you're not allowed to make your own decisions and choices in life. So that means people were dictating to you, and you were always treated like maybe a helpless, undermined, or immature child. Another common driver is that you're dealing with rejection trauma from childhood. So it's very common for this to be a mother wound. Maybe she left you little to no room to make mistakes. You may have felt attacked, scrutinized, judged, or she may have been someone who was highly anxious, dysregulated, stressed out, worried, or controlling because of being in fear. Another driver is there may have been emotional manipulation or physical abuse in your childhood, but it can also mean that if this didn't happen to you personally, it can be and often is ancestral, meaning it was very prevalent in your parents or grandparents or great-grandparents. But now you're reaping the results of the unhealed generational pain. Another driver is your parents may have used religion as a means of control, or as an adult, you may have been unconsciously, because of your childhood programs, you may have been unconsciously drawn to a more controlling religious environment. And this leaves you vulnerable to manipulation. Because you had this pattern from childhood, you may have unconsciously searched for similar people or similar environments to keep you in alignment with your childhood. Over time, other people's truths and opinions have left you feeling suffocated and even more unable to feel like you're free or able to make your own choices in life. Another common driver for hair loss is that you grew up feeling like you don't really fit in, no matter how hard you try. Now, how all of this manifests in our adult environment. So remember, all of these childhood circumstances and drivers, they're not exhaustive. So it's not every single thing that could have possibly happened. They're just some of the most common ones that I see in my work. And those childhood environments don't always cause the same adult manifestations. But oftentimes, if you have any of the listed drivers or various ones and you're suffering with hair loss, then these are some of the other things that might be showing up in your adult environment. Now, hair loss in general carries a message of shutdown. So the body is communicating that something has just gotten too big or too bad to ignore. And it's communicating to you that it's wanting to shut down from top to bottom. So again, metaphorically, this would be the shutdown of, and it's not an actual like shutdown, but again, it's metaphoric. So the hair, considering that's the top of our head, the hair is one of the first things that starts to show this message of shut down. We need to rest and we need to deal with what's going on. So several causes may bring about the onset of hair loss. So a lot of us have these childhood, conditions or drivers or environments. And then we'll go through a large part of our life thinking that this maybe isn't impacting us or not bothering us. And then we start having some sort of sign or symptom. In hair loss, we would call this the onset of hair loss. And so sometimes that can be precipitated by any one of these things. For instance, a major emotional shock. That can be something like loss, grief. So loss of a person, could be loss of a job, a relationship, could be loss of a friend group. It can also sometimes be the loss of an ideal. For some people, and this is what happens, why we often associate hair loss with aging, is really it's the body dealing with loss. The idea, we see plenty of aged people with luscious hair, and then we see some who don't. And so what's the difference? And again, we'll usually bring that back to, it must be hereditary. And I agree, there are some components that are hereditary, but often it's emotional hereditary aspects that we're talking about. So if you've come from a long line of people who struggle with getting older, have a lot of judgment around getting older, you have the feeling of you'll never be this young again, and good only happens when you're young, then it can really feel like a loss when you start to notice signs of aging. And it hits these particular people stronger than it may hit other people who might have grown up in families who celebrate aging or have the feeling of respect or admiration for people who get older. So a lot of these things can contribute. Another thing that can sort of start the onset of hair loss would be an excessive feeling of helplessness about a situation. So there may be a conflict or several repressed feelings, such as despair or worry or boredom or resentment. And these things boil up and kickstart this whole program of helplessness again. And so while it might seem that these are not as big of deals to other people or even to yourself, it's not that the situation itself is such a big deal. It's the fact that it is triggering or reactivating a lot of this stuff that hasn't been dealt with, even as far back as childhood. Another trigger for the onset of hair loss could be that you're about to make a big change that requires you to level up. And so what that does is it triggers a rejection or abandonment program for childhood that reminds them that it's too dangerous to be big or to live to your full potential. There's all kinds of little sayings. Don't get too big for your britches, various things. And what's happening there is that your trust in yourself then gets undermined by these childhood feelings of helplessness or not good enough. You may be completely capable, more than likely, to get to any situation where you're being asked to level up. This could be a promotion. This could be something with a relationship. It could be lots of different ways that you're being asked to level up in your health, your wellness. And what happens is, to do that, you need to deal with some of this counterintuitive or unproductive childhood programming. And so as a way to communicate that from your body to you is through hair loss. Now, hair loss often represents the message that you're not free to be yourself. It reflects an underlying sense of undeservingness or insecurity. You might believe that your intelligence or your value is low because you're often comparing it to others. And that causes you to feel shame or to disconnect from the deeper part of you, the more spiritual, soulful, or intuitive part of you. And it doesn't allow you to connect really with your highest self or your highest values. So that keeps you kind of down in this low level, easily triggered, easily reactive state. And that has a tremendous impact on our bodies. So the onset of hair loss could also be triggered by a major conflict or feeling exacerbated by something or someone. So you may have been putting a great deal of identity around a particular relationship or job or role. And it's as if your bodily security was being threatened if this role or relationship or identity is coming into conflict. For others, because you grew up with a belief that you don't really fit in, you may be trying hard to escape embarrassing or vulnerable situations. But this leads you to avoid really connecting or really showing up in situations. And this may also manifest as now taking on projects, roles, or relationships that might stretch you and help you grow. But that, again, challenges you in your helplessness, hopelessness, and sort of victim mentality. So it's kind of a vicious cycle, one that never allows you to rest, which is what our hair cycle needs and goes through. So again, all very metaphoric stuff. Others may feel that you have to plead your case or convince other people to listen to you or believe what you're saying. Another driver is that you may have had a difficult or confusing relationship with your father. This is especially true for male hair loss, and even more common if your father was losing his hair during some of these times of conflict. The hair loss is a constant reminder that there is unresolved trauma that needs to be addressed at its roots. So another driver is that you may have been experiencing one or several situations where the tension is so great that you feel like tearing your hair out. So we say these things, we have these little idioms and these little phrases, and they're often very metaphoric for a reason. So the body, again, is not meant to carry great tension for long periods of time. And so part of the way that your body's communicating that is by the onset of hair loss. Now, several stressful or even traumatic experiences can accelerate the hair loss process. So when you have a lot of worries, fears, and childhood wounds being reactivated, then that causes us to lose contact with our inner power. And your body is trying to communicate that you want to be free, right? You want to free yourself from all this pressure that's pushing down on you. Deep down, you want to be who you truly are meant to be. And you want to stop living according to outside obligations and opinions. By losing your hair, you are metaphorically trying to separate yourself from that old identity that imprisoned you, the old programming, the old beliefs, really what we like to call trauma. And you likely try to control things in your environment as much as you can because you're afraid that if you were to open yourself up to all of these things that are lying underneath, that you might be vulnerable to being controlled again by an outside force. And this pulls us back into this sort of feedback, negative feedback loop of our beliefs. And then we have something happen to us on the outside, which then challenges us, and then it triggers our beliefs again. Another driver is that you may be often drawn into rigid structures and obligations that are actually keeping you from experiencing personal development and transformation. So this is an attraction toward maybe methodical types of work, maybe methodical types of relationships. You're looking for, and it's the structure of the repetitive, I don't have to think about it, they're sort of unconscious things, that is the feeling that's what keeps you safe, right? So all of these rigid structures, all of these rigid behaviors, all of these rigid relationships are what keep you safe. But what's actually happening is that it's keeping you from experiencing real growth and personal development and transformation, which as humans, we were really designed to do over time. Another driver is that you may often feel scattered and your thoughts feel tangled and confused. And deep down, you believe that it's an illusion to think that you could do better than the way that your life currently is. And that gets you all tangled up inside. Again, tangles, all sort of metaphoric to what's happening with our hair. For men or women, you may be feeling disconnected from your feminine or masculine power. You feel like a fraud at times. You can't seem to actually connect to the image that you project to the world, meaning you have a difficult time believing or seeing what others may see in you, thinking that what they see is this projection that you've put out and carefully constructed. And if they knew the real you, if they could see deep to the real you, that they would not have the same feelings about you. So you may be someone who struggles with compliments or accolades because you believe that they're not truly genuine, because you think that they're coming about this sort of outside veneer that you carefully place. And so you don't allow the compliments to come in because you think it's about the false front that you put and not about who you really are. You may be someone who has a difficult time expressing personal boundaries. You may feel that you have to fight for what you want. You may often sabotage reaching your own goals by putting the goals of others ahead of you. That's one of those kind of servaholic programs that we often talk about in this work. So when someone else needs you, you feel an obligation to serve and put their needs above your own. You may often even lend a helping hand to others despite being in a very desperate need or desperate situation of your own. For others, you may attract people into your life who want to control you, which leaves you stuck in a pattern of disempowerment that again is from childhood. So you then, after that, your opinions and ideas are easily influenced by others. For some, your power is being drawn from anger rather than internal goodness or internal wisdom or internal power. So the power that you act from is one of anger. And so you overcompensate for your lack of confidence by either being too controlling or on the other end of the spectrum, being too weak. And even when you choose sort of the weak, disempowered way of coping, you're angry about it. If you choose the more controlling part of it, it's usually coming through anger, through that sort of control. For these people, there's usually a deep need to appear put together and to keep everyone happy. Now, if you're a woman, you might be drawing too much from your masculine energy due to unprocessed trauma. It's possible that given your experiences, being feminine feels like being vulnerable or being weak. It's possible that you may have been perpetrated against, or it's possible that in your family of origin, the role around masculine and feminine were not clearly defined healthfully. They may have been dysfunctional or disproportionate. And so you may have a difficult time connecting with your feminine out of fear that it may mimic the dysfunction that you saw in your childhood. For others, you may have a deep fear of being alone or abandoned. And this keeps you in environments that might be abusive, stressful, or manipulative. And so that keeps you stressed, keeps you in your head, keeps you being over analytical. And of course, that puts too much pressure up here. And so when our body is trying to communicate to us to rest, it's really wanting us to rest from all of these thoughts. And again, it will show up here in our head, through our hair. So at some point, things may have gotten so bad for some of you that you might decide that you want to bury your head in the sand. You might decide to completely ignore or dissociate from your surroundings or your childhood. You may have a sort of denial way of dealing with this. Doesn't bother me, didn't happen, I don't think about it. And that's sort of that bury your head in the sand mentality. And again, that doesn't allow you to grow. And it metaphorically cuts off the nutrients that are needed from your head for your hair to grow. For other people, you may have been controlled or criticized in childhood, but now in adulthood, you're the one being hard on yourself. That means you likely have a lot of negative self-talk and scrutinize and analyze everything, especially your interactions with others. For some of these people, this happens so regularly and is so normal, they don't even realize it's happening. And so this sometimes takes time connecting with that inner voice because the level of dissociation has been so strong that you don't even have an awareness that it's happening. For some people, all you want is to feel safe, protected, unconditionally accepted. And your hair loss is trying to communicate that you are stripping away, up from its roots, this false sense of identity or safety that you have settled for. The hair is often safe to grow back when all of these deeply rooted beliefs and experiences are healed within the mind and body. Now, as I've mentioned before, the drivers I cover are not exhaustive. And it doesn't mean that every driver should be applicable to you and your situation. That's why I list multiple different drivers for each condition, because you may have all of them, you may have one or two of them. But what they're meant to do is to help individuals gain a little more insight into some things that might be contributing to whatever current condition you're suffering from. Now, it's important to remember that our body is for us, not against us. Though hair loss can feel discouraging, debilitating at times, it can resolve when we learn the language our body is speaking and hear the messages it's delivering through these conditions. I look forward to seeing you next time. Please continue to leave those 5-star reviews and comment if there is a disease, symptom, or ailment you would like to hear covered. And if you're interested in learning more, we encourage you to get involved in the Mind Change community. A great place to start would be one of our book clubs. We have book clubs happening all over the world, some even in different languages. These provide you a way to help support you in your journey. You can find out any information by visiting our website at mindchange.com/book club for more info. Until next time, thanks for joining us again on the Mind Change podcast, where we are changing the world, one mind at a time.